I'm Stanley Sagov. I'm a family doctor and a jazz keyboard player. And I think it has quite a lot to do with social issues and policy, actually. There's a lot of literature, as some of you may know. I sent 2 articles, but there's lots of commentary about the relationship between the ground of being for improvising and running organizations and teaching and governing and all kinds of metaphors, which are very apt, actually.
Amen. And I guess there's a couple of
one more chunk of something to say.
And I'll even introduce myself.
Okay.
I am friends with most people here. I hope to be friends with all people here. I practice psychiatry, psychoanalysis, and forensic psychiatry.
Okay, and I just want to talk about meetings that we've already arranged. There will be Terry Bard on the 15th. I don't know what he's going to talk about.
It's about painting, actually. Terry, besides being a rabbi and a psychologist, and also leading services from bar mitzvahs to weddings to funerals, proceeds to, he is a major watercolorist, and how watercolors fit into his life as a psychotherapist.
The date of that is what again?
What?
I said the 15th.
The 15th of
September.
Yeah. Okay, next will be, oh, this is, who said who you are?
September 15th.
Oh, hi, I'm Stevie Smith.
Stevie practices psychoanalysis and teaches psychoanalysis.
You happen to walk in just as everybody was saying who they are, so.
Pardon?
You
Oh,
happen to
okay.
walk in just as
Oh,
everybody
okay,
was saying.
okay. Oh, because I didn't want to interrupt.
Okay.
Because I'm excited about today and I'm looking forward.
Interrupting is okay.
Okay, so next is Arthur Kleinman on November 17th, who's be talking about bioethics. Now, as it happens, Hal is the chair of the American branch of UNESCO Bioethics Committee or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so
And also the chair of no.
this is gonna be a good presentation.
Yeah.
And then, Dennis, wait a minute. Then on February 23rd, we're gonna have Ann Harrington, who's a professor of the philosophy of science at Harvard, who's written a book, I forget the exact title, but it's about psychiatry trying to find a biological basis for everything and being unable to. I actually sent her a copy of my little book called The Trouble with Modern Psychiatry, which she said she liked. Of course she would say that, but in any event, that is what's lined up. And if anybody here would like to do something into next year, say something, okay? We have a nice lineup right now, and people volunteering to do stuff, as Stan was volunteered in our last meeting.
Careful if you put your hand up and say something. You might get volunteered to give the
You might
talk.
get volunteered. Anyway, that's all really I have to say, and I guess we're waiting for Hal to something with Stevie.
While you're waiting, can you say the bioethics date again, please?
The bioethics is on November 17th.
Thank you.
Okay.
Send us the dates.
Yeah, I send around announcements.
Oh, you did, okay.
I do. I haven't sent those yet, but I will. So,
I think a chair is being gotten for
okay, yeah, the chair is getting a chair. That's pretty. So I guess we're all set to go except for the technical piece.
I think you're just about ready to hear about therapy and hold that jazz.
So I've never given this talk before, and I had no idea exactly how to marry these two things for this audience. So in the spirit of improvisation, I thought I would just approach someone I don't know. you willing to have a conversation with me, an unscripted conversation?
Are you speaking with me?
I am.
Oh, sure.
Good. So what made you come today and what were you hoping to get out of this talk,
Well,
if I may ask?
yes, what I was hoping for, well, first of all, is just what I'm seeing is a wonderful opportunity to speak with you, to hear friends and colleagues, and talking about jazz and communication and medicine, and to have an opportunity to interact with all of
Thanks.
you.
So this was an unscripted conversation, right?
That's right.
No rehearsal.
No rehearsal.
Okay, good. And we got by okay.
Yes, we did.
With articulation and pauses and reception and mirroring of, variety of non-verbal cues. Pretty similar to what I do with my band.
Yes.
So I think there are lots of parallels, and I thought we might start just with maybe someone with better handwriting than me can take people's thoughts down. Otherwise, you'd have to interpret what it might have been that you said.
Now this is a bit scripted. Those two are married.
Oh, there's always a mix of scripted and unscripted. So, best practices and aspirations, perhaps for outcomes. Let's just start with the psychotherapy column first. What do people think about when they think of best practices in psychotherapy? If you were trying to teach someone or tell someone what you do when you're at your best.
Listen.
Okay? So, close listening. Okay, good. What else?
I'd be thinking a little bit of an outcome that I couldn't predict, but left the patient both with more experience and better adaptation.
So empower the person with whom you're doing therapy to discover what's authentic and true and helpful to them.
Yeah.
Can I just say something? Sorry, I forgot I broke my wrist, so my writing isn't. Can you read that? Otherwise, okay. So empower the patient. Is that?
Empower the patient on their terms or from their from the point of view of their well-being, not yours.
Which is a different kind of listening. It's attunement.
Attunement.
With their
Very
experience
nice.
instead of dialogue.
Attunement is good.
Where you go back and forth.
Serves my theme here. Yes.
Non-judgmental listening, which makes me think in music about what Herbie Hancock has quoted, is that there are no wrong notes, only unexpected notes.
Mhm.
And the rest of the group responds and makes it right to move the
So
conversation
responding
forward.
to serendipity by creating a context in which whatever's offered is supported and included and not diminished or ignored. Yes.
Waiting, allowing pauses
Space.
and silence.
Creating space. This is easy so far. You're making my talk. You're giving me my talk.
Stevie said back and forth, so dialogic, attunement.
Interactive. Okay. Maybe you guys are all jazz musicians instead of psychotherapists.
Well, it's not unlike poetry in the sense that there's a lot there. Some of it's said and not said. The attunement.
So paying attention to the notes not played, the things not said, but things implied or in there not being said confer meaning.
And as I think of the dialogue, I think of call and response.
Call and response.
I think Lisa has a
Being comfortable with silence.
Being comfortable with silence.
In medical dental lingo, we say best practices is experience-based, which would not be maybe the case in jazz. Or
Can you explain?
We're supposed to now be scientifically measuring what we're doing and what the outcome was to see if what we are doing actually is doing what we say it's doing and whether it has a positive outcome, which is, I would think, different from jazz.
Well, and the positive outcome is determined in dentistry. Why?
Dentistry and medicine with statistical analysis of the way we've done it versus the control group that was handled some other way.
So that's one piece, but a patient's got to come back to you because they experienced that something worked for them. So it seems like you've got one level of analysis which is documented and in a particular way, and another where the people show up or moving with their feet by having had an experience that served them. I think that
So experience that serves someone.
well, you were saying two
Okay.
things. You were saying one thing, there was an objective level of analysis based, you called it experience. I thought you were going to say the experience of the person at the receiving end.
Well, maybe one way to express that is with the word feedback that you get from the patient, that you get from other musicians.
So responsiveness to the unfolding of what appears to be either measurable on one level and inferred or mutually created in real time.
I think jazz and real science are not unrelated to one another in the sense that, say, if you take the American Songbook, that's a structure, but how one approaches it's different. Really good science is not about an outcome, it's about, as the Nobel laureate, left his name now, physicist said, it's a way of interrogating science. So if you take a jazz song out of the American Songbook, it's foundational, maybe what works, if you will, a classic. But then the way in which it's done is what gets people in the door, and it's also what helps somebody adapt or come back for something lengthy like analysis.
So
There was
in
a
way,
recent review in the New Yorker of a pop musician, and the person said pop songs can be summarized as I want you, I love you, I fear I'm losing you, I lost you, let's dance.
So in a way, Kyle's comment goes to good science raises questions, good engineering gives answers.
Curiosity.
Curiosity, openness, curiosity.
That disturbs some people. It's very interesting because if you have, I mean, I'm not a researcher, but I've done enough to think that way somewhat in terms of questions lead to better questions and they become background for the new field and where's the gap and you're always kind of thinking that way. It can really unsettle other people because they feel like you're being terribly critical where it's just the way you think. So where's the gap?
So in this context, it's the willingness to have the evidence go wherever it goes.
Yeah.
The willingness to for truth-telling and authentic engagement, not based on preconditions.
And maybe even the evidence to be disturbed.
Yeah, all the time, and
It's
that's
disturbing.
So that's not a bad place to start. Yeah.
I think of the interplay between the individual and the relationship, as I think in music between solos and playing with the group.
So what you're doing individually and what you're creating together. Sort of synergy. So we could go on, and we probably will, but let's
Olivia, how are you doing?
let's relate it to some examples. So what I thought I would do, and this is not an easy thing to imagine exactly how to make these parallels real and have a shared experience that we can bring to our work as a musician and or a psychotherapist or physician. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about what improvisation is, what it includes, and people often who are not jazz musicians, including very schooled musicians who are very well trained classically, play extraordinarily difficult works, can go into past centuries and create authentic reinterpretations of things, but are very scared when they're asked to improvise. Classical musicians, in my experience, and I'm a conservatory graduate, and I've had a lot to do with them, they're not usually very comfortable improvising nowadays. And jazz musicians are not very comfortable reading things nowadays. Even if they can read things, doesn't feel like it's expressive in the same way. So improvisation includes many of the things we're talking about, but technically it includes some common language, some idioms, some historical context, some melodies that people know, some chord changes that are sort of embedded over time, and some psychoacoustical phenomena, neuropsychiatric phenomena, if you like, about the way in which brain has receptors to identities. An octave, for example, the C, this register, and a C in another register, our brains know that they're the same note, even though they're separated by, 11 half tones. There's a lot of literature around psychoacoustics, and if you it was a course I did at the conservatory many decades ago that Robert Cogan led, in which he did, just before a lot of computer analysis was available, so we had to do it by looking at scores and writing things and putting big charts and going around the room looking at what he looked at across cultures and across history at what enduring pieces of music included. And there's a remarkable amount of consistency. Climaxes occur almost always 2/3 of the way through a piece. Almost always. And by climaxes I mean the loudest part, the softest part, the part with the greatest density of attacks, the part that had the biggest tension between the lowest note and the highest note. Almost any way you wanted to slice it, it's about 66 2/3 the way in. There are differences, of course, culturally and historically, but these kind of very structural things are there. And the same is true for improvised music. When climaxes occur, how people think of creating a climax, etc. So we have receptors for these things. The idea of music as a social enterprise is an important thing that a number of the authors of some of the references I sent you make the point, that it's interactive, that it's built, in partnership, and that it depends on conviction and trust. People have to trust one another in a jazz band, and they have to play with conviction or decide not to play with conviction in order to make fluent, poised, and mutually supportive creations happen. So I'll play little snippets of some things, and I'm not intending this to be a recital of my solo piano playing. I'm intending this to be in the service of this process of what's the cross-fertilization. So I really have no idea what I'm going to play, so I'll just put my hands down. 2 notes at once. And in between those 2 notes would be, when you play 2 notes together, there are different tones created that we have receptors for hearing as dissonant, not. This one goes together because it uses Pythagorean, harmonic intervals. You take a string, you divide it in half, you get an octave, you do it another way, you get a third, a fifth, etc., and we have receptors for those relationships. So those are consonant. Dissonant. Jazz musicians love to play with that difference between consonant and dissonant, because the scale on which jazz pieces are often composed include quarter tones, which are found in the African pentatonic and other cultural references from which jazz comes, not found in hymn tunes and in conventional practice of. This doesn't sound like jazz, does it? We want to play. So we put those other notes in that play off the expected and the unexpected. So I started with that. So let's see what comes from that. And I need your respectful engagement and attention in order for this to be meaningful for me and meaningful for you. Tease you a little bit. So this came from, to me, it was enough to suggest up, down, open, close, soft, loud, all the elements of speech, mirroring, listening, paying attention. Music doesn't change the world. Art doesn't change the world, unfortunately, but it advertises how it might be. And this music is about close listening, paying attention, making other people right, working in an unscripted conversation in front of people to see we can actually do things together and we can take surprise and unexpected things and we can find out what that person is wanting to say and wanting to be. And this is a picture of how it might look if we lived like that, if we governed like that, and if we behaved like that. I'm going to show you later on, after I've played a few more examples of pieces, some of which you'll know and some of which you won't, what improvising includes and what the techniques are, to show you how we, who play for 240 people at the Regatta Ball with no rehearsal, no conversation, we sit down and play. And we've been doing it this way. I've been playing with my bass player since I'm a teenager in South Africa. I'm 75 now. And with everybody else in the band, mostly since the 1970s, some of them since 69.
Short-term relationships then.
Continuity.
Trust.
Trust. So the way it goes is we get booked from the Blue Note in New York to play at the Regatta Bar. I say, okay, let me check who's in town, whether we're going to be able to do it, which dates. We get a set of dates that people can do it. I send an email around. I say, if anybody wants to be featured or a particular piece they want to play, let me know. I spend a little time dreaming about what kind of statement we want to make this time. I might send a list around of potential things I'd like to play or like other people to be featured in. Sometimes I'll write something and send them a score. The score often for jazz musicians is a set of chord changes and maybe a melody line. Like this, like piece I just played, just those of you that are Jewish will know this. So that comes out of this little thing that we just did, and then so that's how it is, and that's how we do it. So what does it take to do that? It takes a lot of the things we're talking about. And there's a difference between practicing and playing. Practicing where you're acquiring mastery, where you're being self-critical and judgmental, where you're trying to get it right, you're trying to get it fluent, you're trying to get it so that you know that you're accountable and responsible and can respond in this mercurial way to what other people might do. One of my favorite colleagues, drummer Bob Moses, who's played with everybody, he always used to make this quip, why rehearse on Tuesday for what you might play on Friday? And that really is the spirit. So let's take another piece. That's another tune you will know. I didn't play that for a while. I'm just putting my fingers down and just trusting that I'm going to be able to do it differently each time, or I could do it the same, But that's not of great interest to me to be able to reproduce something. I'm trying to be in this moment, right this moment. And here's another one that you also probably know. Etc. So, Stella by Starlight. I'm playing with these little things just to give you a little taste of what the melody is and what the chords are. So if we take those chords, so if I were to take those chords and just play the notes of those chords, just arpeggiate them. Lame, but you can hear it. So, if instead I don't play some notes like you were saying, all notes in the chords, I'm not playing anything out that's not supported by what I'm doing harmonically, but I'm leaving you to fill in what you did or didn't hear, what you expected. So a lot of the art of improvisation is creating a set of expectations which are either artfully given or artfully denied. And the same is true rhythmically. If we do something that's in 4/4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, like a march, but now I can do 1, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4. I don't do the second beat. Your body does it. It's called syncopation. You fill it in. You don't have to be a musician, you don't have to know any of these terms. You just know it already because your brain's organized to do that. We see patterns, and of course it gets, if I do it in 3/4, etc. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, okay? But I'm doing 5/3, I'm doing 4/3, I'm doing 2 against 3. You all know that, whether you know it or not. You hear what's implied by the pulse, and you hear what's given and not given. And that's what you're going to get to see when I show you some of the interactions. And in the interactions, I want you also to pay attention to what nonverbal cues get given, what glances get given. How do people know when to stop and start? How do they know when they're done? How do we know when they're done? How do we know when they've maybe done something that we didn't expect and that we can support in a way that we didn't expect we were going to be called upon to do? So I'll play one more example of a... So here's a piece called Killer Joe. And it's got 2 chords and then a bridge, like most American song forms do. And I'm going to try to, let's see, okay, so I'm going to try to use dynamics, given that it's a pretty simple piece with just only 2 chords, to show what the sort of things that I hope you'll get to see when we're doing them together. And I'll use this piece as one of the first pieces to show you when we're talking about the group, which is more what I'm relevant to psychotherapy, because I'm playing on my own now. So it's different than what we're doing in psychotherapy, I hope.
I'm not entirely sure. And the reason I say that was I was wondering what I learned to improvise working in a prison after research. And I was wondering what was constraining you as you work. Because when I got called in, it was working in a group. It was always life, death, there's, the history or whatever. So the constraints were there. And I couldn't, over time, it took a while to articulate it. But I found myself listening to you and say, that sounds like therapy to me. But you're constrained by something else. I knew where they were. I never knew before going into a suicide or a crisis or whatever what was going to happen. But it came out, and I could sort of see what the demands are. You're sitting here with a keyboard with all of us here, but I don't know what the demands are.
At the cost of being too classical, if we can maybe hold the comments till Stan finishes. I know.
No, I like the comments.
Are you sure?
I much prefer comments.
We do want you to go ahead and make sure that you have the opportunity to interact with us. So, how about one comment per person? Can we keep it to a limit?
It's okay.
So that everyone has a chance to
So,
interact. Yeah.
so the constraints to some degree are consensual. I mean, you're all politely sitting there, and you're not like walking right out or interrupting me, etc. But if you did, as a consummate improviser, I would include you. I'd make it a duet. So here we go. This piece. So these are the two chords. That's it. Bridge. Now back to the two chords. That's the tune. It's a 32 bar tune, 8 measures at first, 2 repeated, and then bridge, and then 8 of a reprise. And I can internalize those 32 bars and play a variety of things over them. This is the last thing I'll share about the technical aspect. So the notes of the first chord, which is a C major 7th, so, and then down to B flat 7. And that's it for those things. So when I'm playing over them, as I said before, I could choose to play just the notes of the chords or the scale. The scale, by definition, the key that the piece is in, is if you took all the notes in the piece, you arranged them from the lowest to the highest, they'd make a pattern. And that's what the scale and that's what the key of this piece is in. So when I'm playing it, I'm using those elements. I'm going to either do a scalar, sort of horizontal improvisation, choosing notes, changing the rhythms, changing dynamics, all the elements of musical expression, or the chords. I could do it vertically as it goes along. Or I could make fun of that or deliberately violate it so as to titillate you. Whether you know the terms for it or not, your brain will know that's not what I expected, or that's what I expected, or it came in a different place, or it was elided, or it relates to another tune with the same chords, not the one I'm playing. So all of those kind of cultural idiomatic things also come into account. The style of the piece, the historical references, and the sound of it. Okay, how do I turn this thing on? Okay. So I'll play a version of Killer Joe we did a couple of years ago. And people didn't know that they were going to be playing this tune. I just announced it and played these two chords to start it, and that's what the performance is built out of. So you're going to have to get back to YouTube. And my pleasure, my deep pleasure in playing with this group of musicians is this combination of trust, familiarity, and the edginess and surprise. I have no idea what they're going to do. And
Jason, how do we get to?
You'll probably have to search for his channel again.
so we've got to go, yes, that's Sagov 1.
Sagov 1. So we have to Sagov 1.
We've got to go to search, I think.
Yep. Yeah, we test Sagov 1.
There you go.
Perfect. Yes, we have
Killer
Sagov 1.
Joe, here you go. It's almost like we thought of it, eh?
Here goes that. What we need to do is to hit play, which is right here.
Okay, good.
Let's see. There we go.
Okay, good. So it's the Stan Strickland on. Here you go. Two chords, that's it. Mike Pipeman on trumpet, John Larchwood on bass, Bob Bilotti on drums. Bass and the drums played together for 43 years.
Wow.
back to the beginning of the chorus. Next chorus.
I almost feel like we should be applauding right now. Hey, just you can pause for a second. I think I'm going to go ahead and take back my silly no comments or one comment per person rule. My mistake. Part of improvisation is knowing you've made a mistake. Which I now illustrate. Stan, I wonder how each of the parts which are being played, how they harmonize within you, and how it reflects something which is within you. Because very often in therapy what we do is we help people harmonize divergent hidden even parts of themselves. And what I'm hearing in this piece is different people playing different parts together and bringing it all together in an amazing, marvelous manner. So does this reflect you well?
So there's a lot of different streams that go into it. Coming from South Africa,
Yeah.
I experienced jazz as the music of integration.
Mm-hmm.
And our fantasy as jazz musicians in South Africa was that America was therefore an integrated place. When I got to New York, I found out it was a little different than what I thought. But nevertheless, the aspiration and the cultural formation of the jazz ethos was the marriage of Europe and Africa. Neither culture could have done it on its own. And there probably has never been as successful a cross-fertilization of cultures as the jazz experience produces. If you take the business letter of jazz, which is pop music, and the art of jazz, which is jazz, with a capital J, that span of music is more popular than any music in the history of music. It's around the world. Everybody responds to different parts of that marriage. And the power of that, and the expression of both protest, responding to oppression, or as I said, the thing that Harold quoted, the jazz is never wholly happy and never wholly sad. It's always got this mixture of bittersweet. There's this at the same time. It's all there.
I have a question that's not psychiatric. That's rooted in my own.
Tell me a bit more about that.
It's rooted in my own baleful history. When I was a kid, I played first clarinet in my high school band and orchestra, and I had notions about getting better. And then I made the mistake of purchasing a Benny Goodman album and listening to Benny Goodman, Let's Dance. And how does he do that? I asked myself. And more than that, how does he do all that improvising and staying on key? And it seemed to me that he was doing it, now that you're talking today, in a major key. according to my recollection.
No.
It's not a minor key.
No, that's not true. Benny
That's not
Goodman, like a lot of American Jews who thought they were assimilating and were trying to play music they thought was American, what they brought to it was the Yiddishkeit and the Eastern European scales, so that they mixed major and minor all the time. What makes Gershwin so instantly recognizable.
Well, that's minor, I can tell, yeah.
Now major. Now dominant 7. Minor. It's exactly that mixture that makes it American, but it wouldn't have been without that mix of those things, major and minor, coming in. Because Hoagie Carmichael, who didn't understand how Irving Berlin could do what he did, said, "How do you do these things?" And that's what he showed him. I keep mixing major and minor. That's what Benny Goodman does.
Welcome to the life cycle.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Other comments, questions? I want to show something else in this thing in a moment. So I want to just play a little bit of the saxophone solo, and I want you to show that when the saxophone solo hands it over to me, there's a particular kind of felicitous handoff that I think when we're doing our best therapy we do.
Can I make one comment about your duet with the trumpet player, though? You would throw in some new ideas, which he would then take and put it in his own instrument, and then you would go back and do it in your way. And then once in a while, you just like throw in a whole new idea, and he would either pick it up or just let it go and stick with his own idea.
Right.
So it really was such an interesting conversation.
Right, and that's also rests on a shared culture. That a culture where he and I both know the jazz idiom, if you like. So this is probably the 1,000th time he's played this tune in one way or another, even if we haven't done it together recently. So let's go. Okay. I played with him forever, and I think a thought, and he plays it. you to notice now when I finish the solo and the band comes back in, the interplay is my great joy in this band. I want you to notice what happens between all of us. So I want to say one more example, and this is a very different kind of thing. How do we search for a particular piece on this? On this channel, on Jason? Okay, well,
We'll go back. Yeah, that's right. I'll go
Okay.
back.
so go back there and then let's look for.
Okay.
That's good. Okay, so
Go onto the channel part there.
Go to the channel part, which is
It's to the left.
to the left. Okay.
It's the first one there.
okay, good. And then can we?
Select that.
Select this. Okay, I'm with you.
You should be able to search in the channel somewhere here.
Okay,
Okay.
good. All right, maybe let's do this one. So
We can search a little bit if you'd like to stand. There's another.
That's okay. So, I'm improvising. So, let me play something with a vocalist to give you an idea about. And the vocalists often require a different level of support than instrumentalists because they can only sing in a certain key. So there's a little bit more preparation that I do when I'm working with a vocalist. I'll find out what their range is, so I'll know what key to play it in. And in my experience, they're needing to get musicians to signal and indicate this kind of support that makes them able to be freer to do the stuff we're doing. So this is a different saxophone player, Robert Douglas Gage. Let's play that one.
So you'll be given voice.
Yeah. Let's play that one. I've seen this one for a while. He is a phenomenal player. He does something called circular breathing, so he can breathe in through his nose and out through his mouth, can play without pause indefinitely. Jackson.
Made me leave my happy home, yeah. You took my love and now you're gone. Oh, snub me. But what can I do? I'm in love with you. Yes, I'll never see the light. No, I get the blues most every time. Oh, baby, since I've been for you.
Okay. Stop that.
That was so hot that our cabinet actually overheated. You could see it. This was hot.
Can you see if we can Jason, can you help us? I'm searching for a piece called let's see. I want to look at playlists.
Stan,
Yeah.
can we have some interaction?
Yeah, we can have some. Yes, we can have some interaction.
Music.
Right?
Feels like too much.
Okay. Feels like too much music to my wife. Questions, comments, reactions.
Well, first of all, Stan, amazing.
Thank
But
you.
how you're able to go ahead and again, when I see these different people playing together,
Jean-Pierre is the name of the piece, but within my channel. I mean, we can look for a channel.
Well, if we just put your name there. Or like this.
there you go.
Jean-Pierre.
Stan, I wonder again how whether each of the people that's playing in some way reflects something within yourself that you're experiencing at the same time.
You mean within myself?
Yes.
Or okay.
Within
Well,
yourself.
with the pleasure I have in doing this kind of music in general, and with this group in particular, is not so much about my own playing or my own solo.
Mhm.
Not that I don't enjoy it, but that's not the centerpiece for me. It's the coherence of the whole. It's how everybody is participating. Space has been created for people. Everybody is heard. Everybody is honored, dignified, encouraged, supported, made right, met where they are, both technically and emotionally. I usually make a little speech when we have dinner together before this. I want to play less, I say, and sometimes I succeed at doing it because I find my playing too busy a lot of the time. So I sort of announce that.
Stan,
Yeah,
can I ask you a question?
yeah.
You mentioned that when a vocalist comes in, you have to find a different level to accommodate her need. I want you to relate that to the psychotherapeutic environment.
Right. So if I got somebody that's very articulate, young, attractive, verbal, intelligent, successful, as we're told, those are the people who succeed in therapy, then I'm going to be meeting that person in that way. But I've got someone withheld, suicidal, or having that kind of ideation, I'm going to have a different way of mirroring and meeting that person where they are. So it's much in the same way. If there's a musician that has a bravura style, then I'm going to need to, in order to meet them where they are, I probably need to give them space so that they can express that more bombastic way of expressing themselves. Or if someone is very tentative and cautious and leaves a lot of space, Jean-Pierre, are we struggling? If you can get to playlists, I can. Well, let's see.
We had it?
Yeah, playlist is good. Okay, good.
Stan,
Yeah.
so you had asked a question a while back, and I kind of forgotten it, but you'd said how you wanted us to watch the way you handed over the
Yes.
music and all that. And what I thought of with psychotherapy was, you were showing us with Killer Joe. I'm no musician at all, so I don't know how you had the basic chords and then the scales.
Yeah.
And it sounded like eventually with the
Track must be
with
99
the
videos.
that you, in a way, you could stop doing all the work. I was thinking of psychotherapy because they took over. Stan Strickland took over the chords, and suddenly you didn't have to do as much. They'd gotten some, and you were just doing some.
Right.
I thought that
So-
was like psychotherapy, where you work and you wait, and then you suddenly hear it coming back in a way.
And if I did that without the others, it would be incomplete. So there's a sense that what's happening when it's at its best, it has this sort of inevitability that a composed piece has, because it has an internal logic and a responsiveness that's coming in real time out of the interaction. It's the sort of presentation.
We found it. Yes.
Okay, good. So this is one version of it. That's not the version I want, actually. But that's all right. That's all right. Okay. But it'll do. It'll do.
Since time is
Just stop it for just a second. So this is a really different kind of a piece, and it's. That's the entire piece, okay? So I'm going to state that on the electric keyboard, and everything that comes after that is entirely out of our collective response to that cue. Yeah.
Is it, do you think, or is it an automatic? Do you feel it in your body? Do you feel it as an emotional response?
All of the above, but I want to go back to the original premise. Practicing is one thing, playing is another. When you're practicing, you're being judgmental, critical, mastering, slowing it down, breaking it into components. When you play, you have to play with conviction and assurance. This is what you're playing right now. It's not practicing.
But it's
This is who you are and who you're not. Someone said they felt they couldn't play watching Benny Goodman. When musicians say that to me, and when I say that to myself, I say, no, I'm never going to be judged on how much like Benny Goodman I am. I'm going to be judged on how much like I am who I am. And that's all that I can do ever, including when I'm playing.
But it's continuously informed by your tremendous practice and knowledge.
Exactly. You know, just as psychotherapy is not just you just luck out because you happen to be feeling receptive that day. You spend a lot of time learning how to listen. You spend a lot of time noticing whether you listened in a way that made you and the patient empowered, and the other things it's an iterative process. Imagine if your corporations and your departments and your practices ran like this, though.
But in fact, very often in therapy, we do. First of all, I'm under no illusion that the 45 minutes, even 5 times a week that someone spends with me is where things happen. It happens in life, all the way outside. Those 45 minutes are simply a safe space.
But they're an advertisement for how life could be. I've had the experience, for example, I've had you said formulaic, something like I joked about earlier. Tell me something more about that, which I'm doing in a rote way. 15 years later, one patient told me, when you said that to me, it changed my life. I said what? He said, tell me a bit more about that. I said, really? What was that? He said, well, no one does that in my family. We shout over each other, we make fun of each other. No one ever says, what did you mean by that? Changed his life, he says. So
And in terms of being non-judgmental, of course, that's our mantra. But the reality is, I still remember one patient who said to me, what really helped me was seeing how you fail. And he was right.
Well, you know what? I saw a patient Friday who was an accountant. And I've only seen him, I would say, a total of in the last 3 or 4 years, maybe 10 or 15 times. And now he's met a woman, he's getting married, they're having a child. He feels like his life has gotten together, and he thanks me. I said, what? You know, I can't imagine that I was anywhere near. He said, no, it was just some of the things you asked me, and some of the things you mentioned to me meant a lot to me. You don't know.
And when I watch you, I see you raising questions all the time in the course of this process then. And the marvelous questions. It's difficult not to listen and see you and not to have questions come up, as you can tell.
The distinction you made between practicing and playing now, in terms of treatment and analysis, a lot of times they say, well, you have to learn the key the first before you can, and they say the same thing in art, and they say the same thing in music. Do you agree with that?
I do. Yeah. I mean, I think that our authority lies partly in what we know and what we've practiced, but the trust and the sharing of oneself is informed by that, but that would be wholly insufficient if that's all you brought to it.
Can I? Oh, all right.
Archie?
Okay.
What stood out for me in that last piece, in terms of your interaction with the vocalist, is that at first the band supported Juanetta in singing the song as it was written and as we recognize it. And then she called on you, handed it over to you, and then from then on, her voice became one of the instruments in the band, contributing to the jazz improvisation. So it was like that you and the band empowered her to sail with her own inspirations the way a therapist empowers the patient to get past the script and get to what's authentic in themselves.
By the way, Archie in his younger life was a music critic for Rolling Stone. That's serious. So,
thank you, Archie. Sorry for coming.
This reminds me of what we're talking about. There's a book called The Analyst Pre-Conscious by Vicki Hamilton, and what she writes about was she did research on what people's expressed theoretical views were the conscious, okay, and what they actually did in their work, and they weren't. What was going on was at the pre-conscious level, there was an integration, like you're talking about, and their real work was quite different because it was processing and assimilating all that they'd experienced.
including Freud's feeding the rat man. Yeah. He was hungry, yeah.
Question here?
Yeah. I was thinking about, my question has something to do with neuropsychiatry.
Yes.
So, you mentioned that jazz, there's like the sweet bitter, and so it's mixed, and I'm thinking ambiguity actually.
Yes, of course.
And so I was wondering, for those, whether when working with folks who have some neuropsychiatric condition, in particular, autism and dementia, what was the experience like? And then the second question is, this ambiguity, is it gonna make it harder or easier or whatever for those who have like particular neuropsychiatric conditions? For example, autism, is maybe I'm thinking like clear cut would be easier, or maybe it's the opposite in music. So I don't. So
I think what happens is we get bored. I think we do a certain kind of music style for a while, and then people exhaust it in a way that it and then someone picks a little piece of what was background and makes it the foreground. Like for example, if one thought about this series of chords. Just that series of chords. And if I were to now say I want to pick notes that are not in those chords, but that track them in a certain way and make that the whole point of what improvisation is going to be about for the next decade, let's say. So I would do. So I'm deliberately picking notes that are not in the chords, and then that sound becomes a style, and it could very, no longer so shocking. But when it was first done, it was experienced by people. Benny Goodman would never have played that. Okay.
And we have about 10 minutes left.
Okay.
So if anyone hasn't made a comment.
And then I do want to try to
And you want
end
to
on
do
this
this.
last
So
thing to
then-
show how the band does
Does
it.
anyone who hasn't spoken have a very brief comment? If not, maybe Stan can go ahead and go on.
But I'm happy to.
Anyone who hasn't yet spoken.
I just want to mention, you probably know this, but somebody sent me a Stefan Harris
Yeah, sure.
TED Talk.
Yeah.
It's about jazz and what he calls the science of listening.
Mhm.
So you can Google it, and it's very much what you're talking about.
So this is a Miles Davis piece. He's famous for saying, "Think of a note and don't play it." So this is Jean-Pierre. This little. That's it. Okay.
Where is it? Jason?
Where is it?
Here we go. We're about to play.
Yep.
No, to aim it and oh, sorry. Yeah, we got it. Yep, you got it. Good. We could go on, and yet time is a thief. So first, Stan, thank you so very much. Wow, wow, wow.